Welcome to the second part of this afternoon's session. My name is Terry Galoina. I'm a volunteer here at the Security Conference. And our second session is with Jason Nations. His topic is Mission Alignment in the Cloud, Achieving Real-Time Visibility for Unified Cybersecurity. So Jason lives in Oklahoma City. He's a field Cisco at Stream Security with 20 years of experience in cybersecurity leadership across IT and OT. Former CSO of OGE Energy, he oversaw security for 25 campuses, 10 power plants, and over 500 substations. He is a U.S. DOE OT Defender Fellow and co-author of the DOE Cybersecurity Maturity Model, or also known as C2M2. Jason is an adjunct professor of cybersecurity at Oklahoma City University and holds multiple security certification. So if you'll please help welcome Jason.
Okay, thank you for joining this afternoon. So we're gonna kind of get rolling here. So I didn't realize we weren't gonna have a display screen. So I've got some notes here. It's the one time I've done a presentation where I was gonna make sure there was notes, so I make sure I hit some high points, but that's all right. We're gonna manage. So thanks a whole bunch for joining. We're gonna talk today about the importance of making sure that you're aligning your organization with the mission of your company. And we're going to juxtapose that with the way that NASA, because we're here in Space City, and Hugh Conroy, we've got a nice little spaceship here. So it seemed apropos. We're going to juxtapose the way that you need to align your organization and your security organization with the business goals of your company and the mission of your company, with how NASA did it through the Apollo program. And so, like I said, because we're in Space City, this felt like a great way to make a point, and it felt like a fun way to talk about sometimes an interesting subject. So sit back, relax, we'll dive in. So I got to figure out where to point this clicker. Okay, so you got about me, you don't care about me, nobody's here to talk to me per se. So again, I'm Jason. I grew up here in Texas. I am the field CISO, not the field Cisco. I thought about the thong song when she said that. Maybe that's inappropriate, but I was thinking about Cisco when she said that. That made me laugh. And so we don't have the same hair, and he's more successful than I am. Well, arguably in our fields, perhaps we're equally successful. I don't know. I think I'm doing okay. So I've walked the road that I'm about to share and discuss, not the NASA part, but the monitoring journey. I've done that. And so in my role at OG&E before I joined Stream, I was the CSO. So I was accountable for cyber, physical, IT, OT, network, monitoring, field telecom, incident command system. What I realize now with some time in between working there and working somewhere else, that the only thing I wasn't really good at the time was saying no. So I had a very large portfolio, and it also came with having a requirement to be able to understand what was going on, because I was now accountable for things that were happening. And so I decided if I was going to be accountable, then I was going to make sure I had visibility so that when I got asked questions, I could be able to give actual legitimate, valid responses. So that's kind of the origin story for what we have. So let's dive in, and let's go. So in 1961, John Kennedy laid out a mission that said, put a man on the moon and return him safely. So let's hear in his words, if we can make this happen.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Okay, other than him being sort of frozen there looking down, this is a great clip, and I want you to think about that last line, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And so when you think about that last line that he gave, I want you to compare that with your security journey for yourself or your organization, right? And I would hope that resonates, or at least in some way sounds familiar, because it turns out that most of the time in the security profession, we end up being the people that are running towards the bad instead of running away from it like most folks, right? And so So that tends to make much of what we do as security professionals be sort of on the hard side, right? And we're often brought in late in projects, and we have to figure out how to secure things while they're in motion. That's incredibly difficult, as I'm sure you guys can all attest, right? If we're not cautious, as well as security professionals, we can be the reason why a project is on the verge of failure because we can make a project fail because we're trying to add too many constraints to it, right? And so during our conversation today, we're going to see how NASA got aligned with their mission, and then we're going to see how we can model that, and then talk about some sort of practical security strategies for how we can help our organization execute this mission, right? So again, John Kennedy has laid this out in 1961. We're going to put a man on the moon, we're going to bring him back safely, right? Which is a pretty large paradigm shift in that it had never been done before. So we got to ask the question, right? What's the mission? And within your organizations, does everybody know what the mission is inside of your organization, right? And so I don't know if this is real or if it's just a great apocryphal story, but the story goes, right, in 1962, in his first visit to NASA, President Kennedy was there, and so during the tour of the facility, he bumped into a janitor who was carrying a broom, and the president just said, "Hey, what is it you do here at NASA?" And the man's response was, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And that level of alignment from the bottom of an organization all the way to the top and from the top all the way to the bottom is incredibly valuable. And I don't know if we can all say that our organizations really fully understand from a security perspective how we're helping support our business in its aims. But that's really what we need to shoot for. And so a question that I sort of ask here in the bottom, right, is are all the members of your team clear, and do they understand your organization's mission? So I told you I work for an electric utility. So one of the things that we sort of hammered home with our teams was that our job was to ensure that our company could generate, distribute, and transmit electricity. And that could take multiple forms, but that was our job. And that our customers were our ratepayers, who are people like you and me who use electricity, but also people within our company. And that was really important because we couldn't have the guys that would say things like, "We're not doing it that way on my network," or "I'm not letting my firewall be configured that way," or "I think that's stupid," or whatever. Think of the myriad excuses that I'm sure you've all heard. That's the kind of thing that we worked really hard as leaders to try to avoid. And so we got to be careful there. And we don't want to have, again, like other questions I can think of is like, they can't have that access to the data, or at least they can't access it that way. Why can't they just figure out how to do it without the data? Right? Those are tough things to say to your business and have them want to partner with you, right? And these get said by security teams, and they can get in the way of an organization trying to accomplish its mission, and we've got to be really careful with that, right? So on July 20th, see, presentation's already over. July 20th, 1969, NASA achieved their mission, right? We're done. I can drop the mic. We're out of here, right? Apollo 11, that's Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin stepping out of the limb. The Eagle has landed, all that good stuff, right? And here's a takeaway, and maybe this is takeaway number one from our talk today, right? If we skip ahead, we can see successful outcomes from the Apollo program, but that doesn't give us the opportunity to learn as much if we look closer, because I don't know if you guys are aware, but since we'd never put a man on the moon before, there was a lot of effort that took to get, I don't know if that's Armstrong or Aldrin. I don't know. If you can tell by that profile, then good on you. And if you've seen the picture, perhaps you would already know. I don't know. But whichever one that is, there were a lot of steps in between them getting to the moon and stepping off the leg of the limb and getting off the ground in Florida, right, when they first took off. And there's a lot of steps in our cloud journey as well. And so we're not going to be able to sort that in one day. And so we got to think through that, and we got to understand it, and we got to make sure that we can't skip ahead, and that our takeaway here is that we got to try to look at the things that have gone on and learn from them, just like our friends from NASA did. So if we look at our next slide, right, mission alignment. So how can we get our team to the moon? That's really our question. And the moon is, it depends on what your organization do. And you know what your organization does. And I would challenge you as a leader or a practitioner to understand your business. Questions like, how do we make money? That's a great question. And if you have an understanding of that, then when you go and ask for money later, you can use that in your response. As a former CISO, having to do board presentations and other stuff, I always tried to make my security slides and those quarterly presentations look just like the CFO's, because boards and business leaders can read a slide deck from Excel. But if you start talking about CVEs and CVSS scores and vulnerabilities and threats, they don't know how to contextualize that or figure out how that impacts the business, right? So you got to get that mission alignment, right? And so as we're talking about NASA and the Apollo program, I want you to be thinking about your organization and what going to the moon means, right? And as I said, right, at the utility, we've got to support the company's ability to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity to our service territory. And anything that didn't serve that mission was actually getting in the way. And it was something that we, again, stressed to our team. I stressed it to my leader, had my leaders stress it to other leaders, because you'll get questions like, why are we doing this? We went to the cloud because it was supposed to be easier. Why do I need this extra stuff? Because I'm in the cloud. It's secure, isn't it? Those are conversations that you have had, will have, or are going to have. There's great eventuality around that, right? And so you want to be equipped by understanding how your business operates and how it's supporting your business and your critical business functions to be able to communicate a cogent response to that. And so along those lines, when we think about how we get to the moon for us, then let's just look at NASA for a moment, and let's look and see what it took to get to the moon. And so this is kind of lo-fi, but I thought that was appropriate. And so what did it take to put a man on the moon? So I just did a quick Google query, right? And that's very small. It's a bit of an eye chart. My apologies. And so I'm like, hey, Google, list the steps that it took to put a man on the moon, right? And so we get that we have to, we got to build a rocket, right? And so they got to get from a Saturn 1 or a Saturn 1B all the way to a Saturn 5 that's not going to explode on the deck as they light off this incendiary, gigantic, building-sized Roman candle, right? We also had to build a spacecraft. So we get them into space. What do we do now? Then they had to figure out how to get a lunar module built, because they realized, well, we can't take this thing that's floating in space, that's not built for any gravity, that doesn't have thrusters that would give sufficient lift to get us off the moon, so we got to figure out some other way, right? So they had to build a lunar module. And then they had to have some computing power, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but they had to science the heck out of this. There's a lot of calculus. There's all kinds of different things with thrust and lift and all kinds of different things that they needed a computer for, that now our phones are likely superior to the computing power that existed in an Apollo module. And then they had to build spacesuits, right? Because you get them up there, and then, hey, there's no atmosphere, so that's not ideal. And you freeze to death in the shade, and you melt in the sun. And even the visors on their helmets, right? They had to be special, because they would be the old guy who stared at the sun till his eyes burned out, right? And then they had to come up with software to do this. There are lots of stuff, right? So I messed up my slide there for a second. So right, there's a lot of steps, and all these things NASA had to do needed to work in sync to accomplish their mission, right? You couldn't get these out of order, because think about it, if you built a lunar module, but it was so gigantic that the rocket that you needed had to be 10 times bigger, then you probably weren't going to be successful. So you had to do this in steps. With our cloud security environment, we're going to have to take that in steps. So don't try to, I would say, eat the whole elephant, because that's what I would normally say, but I speak in cliches, by the way. But I think maybe we don't try to get the man on the moon in the first shot, maybe. Somehow, like, you guys figure out a spacey way to say that, and we'll come back, and that's what we'll add. Right? And so what if the members of the team had just dismissed the idea of going to the moon out of hand because it had never been done before? That's a question we got to think about. And if we're honest, there are people on our teams that do just that. Why are you trying to do this? Right? A business person wants to do something. They're probably just trying to do their job. They don't understand the implications of what's going on. And sometimes security just says, nope, I'm out. And if we become the Department of No, then we're not going to make it to the moon. and that NASA had to fail through so many of these, right? So the booster that they sent up that was the rocket, well, that was a Saturn V, but there were like 12 iterations of the rocket, and now they only labeled it 5 because they were like Saturn 1, Saturn 1B. They had lots of different stuff. They failed. The lunar module itself went through a whole bunch of module adjustments. The spacecraft, well, they had the Gemini program, so they already knew what was going on there. That was a little easier. But spacesuits had to be different, all the software, all the training modules. There's a lot of different changes there. We got to be careful not to be negative. We got to understand what we need to do. We got to work in sync. So now, let's go and let's think about this too. So often when we think about security, and we think about having great cloud security, we think about visibility, all these things, we think in terms of tools. I gotta have this tool, right? Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what a lot of people equate that with, right? And so we get on these monitoring journeys and we start thinking, well, I gotta have all these tools. And if that was the case, maybe we'd never have a breach or a compromise, right? Because in a second, we're gonna talk about this, but I betcha we all got a lot of tools. Maybe they're not always the right tool, but we got a lot of tools. We don't lack for tools. And my hot take, maybe number one hot take of the day, right? I think having a good cloud security is a leadership function as much as tools. And so think about this, like what is your, in order to figure out what tools or people, process, technology you need, you gotta start with questions like, what do we need to know or do in order to ensure that we're successful? And put that in a cloud context. So from a cloud security perspective, what do we need to know, security? What do we need to know or do in order to be successful? Are all of our team members as aware of their contribution as the NASA janitor? Because that could screw us up. If we've got the initial call takers that don't understand their mission, if we've got the level 3 analyst that's a superstar, but they don't understand urgency. This is important to the business because that's the kind of stuff that's that janitor, he knew, I got to make sure this is good. Now, I don't know if the floor being super spotless would have prevented a moon launch, but it probably wouldn't help, and it would be something that guy could just do his contribution, right? And based on our NASA example, we have to make sure that people, process, and technology are all aligned. This isn't just tools, right? Does security have all the data that we need? Or do we have data that could be used to make business decisions by the larger organization? Here's one of those great things that I came to the realization well into my security journey as a CISO, is that there were times when my team had data that could impact the way that our whole organization operated. If we had a storm and we had to surge a whole bunch of people to a special campus to go do storm restoration, they're gonna surge 300 people there. But I know I only have capacity for Wi-Fi for 25. Is it a good idea to surge those people there and expect Wi-Fi as it is right now? No. So either we got to surge somewhere else or we got to find a different way to provide that service. And those are the kinds of things that you have that would be incredibly valuable to business decision makers if you shared it. But you've got to have the ideas to understand how your business works and operates. You have to have the trust to be able to make sure that your data is accurate, and then you've got to have the sort of organizational stroke to be able to be part of the conversation so that you can influence those business leaders that are making those decisions. That's a really important thing that's sometimes missed because we think, I'm just a security guy, I'm looking for passwords. I don't know, that's a bad example, but just I think you understand what I'm saying. So let's move forward here. So another thing to think about, right, is along their journey, NASA experienced some critical failures, right? And so if doing our jobs was a Hollywood movie, then we could all very boldly proclaim, and I realize how much like the Star Wars crawl this kind of looks all of a sudden. We could all boldly claim like as a movie poster, we've never had a failure, never had an issue, but that's just not true. The fact is we're all gonna face some sort of challenge. Some might be significant enough to call them a failure. You gotta figure that out. And that for us, just like for NASA, this is maybe takeaway number 2 here, is that tactical failures can teach us lessons that can lead to strategic success, right? And so go back to the Edison idea of Well, I didn't fail at making a light bulb 635 times. I just found 635 ways not to do it. That's the one way to look at it. But we got to understand that there could be opportunities for us to learn from the tactical things to help us in our strategic mission. And that's not always bad, right? Because NASA learned some things with those rocket tests or with their lunar modules. And if you've ever looked at the history of the Apollo program, right, the idea of the first lunar module, it was going to weigh significantly more. They had these giant windows in the front because they were like, well, the astronauts need to be able to see. And they're like, but do they? And so the windows got to be much smaller, and the windows were much thinner. If you remember, it was like this giant, thick piece of huge plastic that was very heavy. Well, now the windows just got to be really small, and they just look straight down. The whole design of that was influenced by things that they learned. We should be influenced in the same way, right? And so let's look at a few tactical failures from the Apollo program and then see how they shape that strategy, and then ultimately to success, right? All right. So Apollo 1, this one's tough, right? January 27th, 1967. I know that date by heart because my birthday is actually January 27th, not 1967. Though if I looked this good in 1967, I would expect you to say something nice about that. But Apollo 1 led to the death of 3 astronauts pre-launch. They were testing a couple days before their big launch, and the guys got stuck in the capsule and caught fire, and they couldn't get him out fast enough. They had to learn a lot of lessons from that, right? It rocked NASA to its core, right? And NASA, unlike most of us, was subject to congressional inquiry. And so they were having to justify a lot of things, and it really set them back, and they did this. And so I hope the stakes in your organization aren't quite so high, but mistakes can still have consequences, and it's important that we're paying attention to the marketplace of ideas. I was just talking to some guys up here a second ago kind of about this same thing, right? Watching for both good things and bad things that are going on around, right? And how can we better embrace those good things, and how can we avoid the pitfalls of the bad things? Those are the ways that we get better. And that's really, really something that as a good security organization and as a leader, you should be watching for. And so let's look at this slide, right? So what do these 3 companies all have in common? Do we know? And you're welcome. This is not a rhetorical question. I'm happy to hear a shout out from the audience if you have any ideas, right? Yeah, okay, they've all been breached, right? So these are all examples of failures that people within our profession have experienced, right? And whether we realize it or not, they have shaped the way that we operate. And so we'll just kind of take them one at a time, right? If you're of a certain age, then Target really resonates with you. I would argue that Target is the reason many people that are my age and older, and many of you, have jobs. Because Target had monitoring, they had visibility, they were getting so many alerts from their freezer cabinets that they didn't know what they were, so they just squelched them. And then hilarity or calamity, whichever way you choose to think about it, ensued, right? It's why I had to get a new credit card in 2012 because I used it and then Target got breached. SolarWinds is another great example of how not to respond, right? Is it ever a good idea to blame the intern in congressional testimony? In case you're not sure, I'm going to answer that for you. No, it's never a good idea to blame the intern. It's also not a good idea to have your intern do development work streamed on Twitch and broadcasting your encryption keys. But whatever, that's fine. Everybody does their own thing, learn from it, right? And then Experian. This one is one that is really near and dear to lots of us because it just had some things that in December kind of fully kicked in, right? Experian was the thing that we all knew, people in our profession could face charges if we do response wrong, right? Never a good idea to sell your stock and then tell everybody, hey, we had a breach. And now if you're a publicly traded company, thank you for SEC requirements that you have to report breaches and have notifications there, right? Just like the Apollo program, we ought to be paying attention to these failures, right? And I was joking with these guys up here that this is an opportunity as security leaders to never fail to capitalize on a crisis. If you know you need something and there's a similarity that's happening in the marketplace, this is where you can go back and say, hey, we got to fix this or it could happen to us. And where I used to work, reputational risk and reputational impact were the #1 risk category that I always had to worry about. Always worried about it being in the newspaper or having a regulator come after us or having the news start talking about negative about our company. It was always tough. right? And so we ought to study and learn from these guys, and we ought to just also do our very best not to make the same mistakes. Don't blame the intern. Don't squelch the alerts. Don't trade stock before you announce the breach, right? Okay. So now we'll take a look at an example of some NASA failures. So now we have Apollo 13. Right, so we've already landed on the moon. I get that, but I want you to see that, in my estimation, this is NASA's most successful failure. Right, because the goal with 13 was to go to Balmoral Highlands and have another moon mission, and Jim Lovell was going to get to finally touch the moon after being so close. Yada yada yada. But then trouble happened, right? And so NASA, thank goodness they were aligned with what their mission was, which was really that second part of the whole bring them back safely. And at that point, NASA literally had to figure out how to get round pegs into square holes to save the astronauts. And they were able to do it because they were aligned. And so the thought process for you guys here is that in your most critical times for your organization, is there alignment across people, process, and technology that enables you to excel? And that NASA certainly excelled in this, right? They got these guys home safely. Most of us weren't alive when this went down, so I don't know if we really could understand the feeling around here in Houston when this was going on, but it was pretty wild as I understand it, and there was a lot of thought that these guys are just like that Russian dog that died up in their spacecraft and never, like, the idea was to let the dog die, and there's, the fossilized, I don't know if it's fossilized because there's no atmosphere, so he's just floating around in a Russian space capsule until it falls out of orbit or something, I guess. I don't know. And so let's look at some tactical things. That was an aside. I apologize. Let's look at some tactical things now that we can think about our strategy that can help us succeed. So if we look at cloud security, right? So let's make this a little bit interactive, right? So how many of you use, let's do a show of hands. I know you're all raging introverts. No one's watching you, I promise. We can have everybody cover their hands, put their hand over their eyes if you want. How many of you have at least one of these in your environment? Show of hands, at least one of these, okay? All right. If you have more than one, how many of you have multiple people that are experts in the administration of any of these solutions? How many of you have multiple people, if you've got more than one, that are experts in the administration of these solutions? You've got one brave soul back here, and you as well. So you've got multiple people across AWS, Azure, GCP, and containers that are experts in that stuff. Lucky you, you guys have it well. Like, you're doing good. Good for you. Here's another question. Are there differences in the security capabilities of these providers? Just a quick yes or no, not a trick question. Are there differences in the security capabilities of these providers? I need my expert, guys. Would either of you qualify yourself as an expert? Because I was going to give you the old bold move, Cotton. Let's see how that works, because that is bold. Okay. Can we agree that there are differences in the security capabilities across these three vendors? Yes? Are we good to expert guys? You get 2 votes each, not just 2 votes. You get that, all right? You're like the mom tiebreaker vote. Mom gets 2 votes. Where do we want to go eat? Mom gets 2 votes. All right. So we got some differences in the way that these capabilities exist, right? And are there gaps? Here's another one for you. Expert guys, would love for you to weigh in. Are there gaps in the offerings of these providers that are different than controls that you might be accustomed to having in your legacy or on-prem solutions? Are there gaps from these that you think are different from what you're used to or expect in your legacy environment? I saw somebody shake his head. Anybody see gaps in the capabilities? Okay, I'm just going to skip right to it. I already showed you we landed on the moon. Yes, there are gaps. I don't know that it's intentioned per se, because I don't think anybody would want to do that, but there are certainly gaps in the way that we think of historical, traditional on-prem security, client-server-based agentic approaches to how our cloud providers with cloud-native tools are offering, right? So takeaway number 3, the best organizations are going to be able to operate differently to provide cloud security, and they're going to have to perform much like NASA did with the Apollo program. You're going to have to learn how to do it differently, because the environments for your on-prem with client-server, with generally server-based resources, is going to be different than ephemeral, non-server-based resources in the cloud. And when we do anything with the cloud, then our control and our sphere of control gets limited and is less, which means that if we operate the same way we always did, then we're only going to get what we always got. You love it how I make this circular conversation, and which means you're not going to have enough because you're not going to be able to answer all the questions, right? And so to do this, we're going to have to take on the challenge and find those hard things and figure out how to operate differently because the operational paradigm has completely shifted here, right? Okay. So with that in mind, let's come up real fast with a cloud security mission statement. So now we're going to have some alignment. This is where I'm trying to actually put some words here so that you can help, right? So your idea, I would hope, this is maybe hot take number 2, is that you should hope for this, is that as an organization, we're going to provide cloud security capabilities that have feature parity between what we've developed for our legacy and on-premise environments in order to ensure that our business can continue to execute its mission. So the idea that we have feature parity between what we do in the cloud and what we do on-prem should not be a foreign language. You should be thinking, whatever I do in the cloud, I should have parity between what I'm doing with my on-prem environment. And that's a big challenge, right? But we're going to make it our mission to monitor and protect our cloud environments as good or better than we already were doing that in our legacy environment, right? And everyone on our team, this is another element that we have a mission statement, so now we can communicate this, and this becomes, like James T. Kirk would tell us about the prime directive. It becomes our prime directive. I compare everything I'm doing to this. Does doing this help me monitor this better, as good or better than my on-prem? I should consider it. Is this going to make me be able to have security capabilities that are as good or better? No? Well, then maybe I shouldn't do it. Or if the answer is no, well, then what do I need to do to make sure that I'm hitting that target? That's a really important thing, right? And failure here may not lead to astronauts dying or that we maybe lose the space race, but it could mean that bad things happen to our company's bottom line, which in the long run hurts you, right? Because if you work for a publicly traded company and you have stock, then you're hurt that way. If you have a 401k that's tied to company stock, it's hurt that way. If you want to have a job for a long time and your company now has a major catastrophic breach, you could lose your job. Not because you had anything to do with the cloud necessarily, but because they may not be in business. So important that we understand that our bottom line could be affected. And knowing this is our new mission is going to have to be important. And that means also that we're going to have a strategy associated with it to make sure that we're successful. Because we can have words, right, that are just words, like the Apostle Paul would say in Corinthians that I'm a clanging gong that's of no value. We don't want to do that. We want to have words like this, and now we want to put a strategy behind that. And we got to remember that our strategy is going to involve multiple facets, right? Because when we had the silly Google list, we had 6 or 7 different pop-ups. I think there were 7 or 9 categories. It was so many I couldn't fit them onto one slide. Maybe there was an AI way to do that. I should have taken advantage, but I'm old. But no, we had a lot of things. So your strategy may require you to have multifaceted approaches to do this. So it can't just be, we're going to get this tool, and it's going to take care of everything, or we're going to get these 2 guys, it's going to take care of everything, or we're going to make this one process, it's going to take care of everything. There are no silver bullets. Is that hot take number 3? Maybe, I don't know. Hope you're keeping score at home. Okay. So I kind of stole my own thunder here, but I'll tell you, right? Like, more tools does not always equal more visibility. So let's play a game again and let's do some stuff, and then we'll talk about these sort of statements that are on here. So quick by show of hands, how many people have 5 different monitoring type security tools in their environment? 5 different. Raise your hands if you have 5 different ones. If you have at least 5 different ones, I would expect more than 2 guys to raise their hand. You guys nobody has more than 5? Okay, does anybody have more than 5? Okay, seeing some more hands, all right. The idea here is that if you have 20, you keep your hand up for 5, and then 10, I should have explained this. It's bad, it's late in the afternoon. All right, does anybody have more than 10 security tools in their organization? Everybody freaking raise your hand because you know you do. I'm not talking cloud, I'm just talking security. Because you got an EDR, you got a SIEM, you got a SOAR, you got a vulnerability management platform, you got an identity provider, you got a endpoint extra stuff. You've got firewalls, you've got DNS security. We can rattle off if like there wouldn't be 10 million vendors out in E3 if you guys didn't have a bunch of tools, right? So we all have, can we just lock in and agree on this? We got a lot of tools, yeah? Okay, so if we all had, since we all have a lot of tools, does anybody here, can you say with honesty, I have to add that qualifier, that you have 100% visibility into everything happening in your environment at all times? With all your, how many tools you got? Ballpark? More than 10? He's got more than 10, can't see 100%. Anybody else? Anybody here willing to stand up and say, I got 100% visibility in everything that I can see? Nope, I didn't think so, because I didn't either. And I don't have a way for you to do that, let me be clear. Even though I work for a vendor, I don't make that, like, because that is bananas. That's not a good promise to make, right? So visibility isn't necessarily a tools problem. And if we think, again, to legacy tools don't necessarily help us with these visibility gaps that we're going to encounter in the cloud, right? Because client server on-prem, on my own network with multiple VLANs is not the same as what I'm going to experience with my cloud environment. It's just not. Right? And so again, do the appropriate people in an organization have what they need to be able to respond appropriately? So here's another missional alignment thing. Everybody on the team's got to be equipped. You cannot sit around and think, well, that guy's the janitor, using the NASA example. Nothing wrong with the janitor. I think that's a perfectly honest profession. Love it. You can't think, well, that guy's just the SOC analyst. He doesn't know what the heck he's doing. Or he's just taking those first calls, right? You got to enable everybody in your organization, across the organization, to know what their job is and to be able to help. Because what ends up happening so often in security teams is that the 80-20 rule comes into effect. That 80% of the work, the real thinker work that is required, is done by 20% of the people. Because that guy's new, we don't know. That girl's new. That girl doesn't know. That girl doesn't know where all the dead bodies are. That guy, he just got here, whatever. We got to equip everybody to be able to help us respond. And the more we do that, the better we take care of our people, the more likely those people are going to stay, because we're not grinding them to a nub, and they're going to be doing better. So we've got lots of tools. We got to be careful with that, and we got to compare again to Apollo to know that we got to align people here, right? Because if we hadn't, then we never would have made it. So let's look here. I'm trying to give you, and it looks like I'm running out of time. So let's give you some strategic success criteria. This will help you get to alignment, and this will help you. And so these are specific things that I, having done this, and I would say pretty well, but don't take my word for it. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards if you want to talk more. But here's some success criteria that you should be looking at. And these are going to start helping you get into things you should look for. And these are tactical that can help you build a strategy, right? Oh, sorry, wrong button. So you need to take advantage of all your existing tools, right? You spent all this money, you did all these business cases, you did all these things. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Take advantage of existing tools. Do I have something that can already help me? And perfection is the enemy of good. If you got nothing, stop trying to be perfect. Just get something, right? We were talking about that earlier. A couple guys up here, like, if you got nothing, you got to get a starting point somewhere. I once had a breach where I had to drive 3 hours to a location. That's all I'm going to say. And I prayed the whole time, dear Jesus, please don't let this be a breach, because I got this thing that's going to come, and I would have so much better tools if you just give me 2 weeks. Fortunately, the Lord he's always good to me, but he was really good to me that day, because that turned out not to be that. And that's a different story for a different time and a different place. And if you want to ask me, I'll tell you. Operate in real time. So this is another one. You cannot have old data for your cloud environment and expect to succeed and to know what's going on and be able to answer those hard questions about, am I secure? Because if you're operating with old data, think about the crazy number of things that could occur between the time that someone makes a firewall rule because they're just trying to get 2 boxes to connect, and then they back the change out, but you haven't had a scan that started before or after any of that happened, so you didn't even know it happened. Crazy stuff could happen. You want to try to normalize data across multiple sources, and you should look for solutions that help you to do that. Real time, normalized data, because what you don't want is the 7 guys that need, from network, from architecture, from infrastructure, from identity, from security ops, all getting their 20 tools, jamming those together, trying to create CSV files to get data that says 10.1.1.1 at 1600 Zulu time with nation JT, get all the instances of that all lined up so we can see what this guy was doing. That's really hard. You want to find solutions that can normalize that data for you and help you do it. You want to automate. It is very important that you do everything you can to get repetitive tasks that can happen, letting the software do that for you. because every time you have a human touch this, you have error possibilities. And so automate everything you can. If it's a simple, repeatable task, then don't make the guy screw the tube of toothpaste top on every time. Get a machine to do that for you. And then take advantage of AI where it makes sense. So again, we're gonna talk about AI in a second, and this may scare some of you, but AI for monitoring is one of the greatest use cases that we actually have. And this is not a buzzword bingo here. There are some great use cases with AI where it really helps and makes sense. On the people and process side, communicate your mission, align to standards. Having standards are very important. It means that you're not subservient to a tool that this is the way the tool does it. You go find the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You use the NIST incident response framework and get your organization operating with those. And then if you got to find tools, because inevitably you're going to have to, but those should fold into what you're doing, not the other way around, right? And so if somebody's doing something weird, that probably should be a disqualifier of the way they're operating, right? Enable and equip your staff at all levels, right? So this is an important one. And one of the things that I like to think about is don't make that first guy just be an escalator. If the guy taking the first call, every time their next move is to open a ticket and then call out the on-call guy, what the heck do you need that person for? You can get a monkey to open a ticket, right? You don't need that guy. So either make that person equipped to be able to do a triage and initial troubleshooting, or stop having them call him and just have him call the other guy directly. You're fouling it up. That's a terrible experience for the end customer, and that's bad news. And then develop, this is another thing that the cybersecurity maturity model from the Department of Energy has, and I would encourage you to look at it. It's called the common operating picture. It means that you and you and you and you and me all have different roles in the organization. And so we would look at the same data and make different decisions because, well, this impacts me one way, this impacts you the other way, but we're all looking at the same data set. We've broken down a silo. It's the company's data, not mine, and we all can see it at a macro level and understand what's happening. That's very important. All right, I'm running out of time here. So really quick, we're going to look here. This is the Rumsfeld matrix, and I love this because it's the idea of known knowns versus known unknowns. And I only have about a minute, so we're going to quickly talk about this. As a CISO, I always hated those are we secure questions, right? Our level of awareness and understanding are greatly diminished in the cloud compared to traditional on-prem, right? We know that. And if we're gonna make sure that we're not having something eat our lunch without us knowing, we have to make sure that we minimize the unknown unknowns. Those are the things that I don't even know I don't know. I want to try to get it down to everything I don't know is something I know I don't know. And now think about that for a second, but I only have a minute. We can talk about the Rumsfeld tautology anytime you want. But our cloud environments are very connected, and they're very complex. And we also have critical business functions now operating in the cloud. And so we got to minimize those unknown unknowns very much. All right. And then we got to train our team. So I'm going to quickly get to these because I'm running out of time. But is your team aligned functionally to respond to their best, right? This is one of those people always forget. We're going to get all these processes and get all these tools, but we're not going to change their leadership structure. We're not going to change how they're measured. We're not going to change how they're managed. We're not going to change how they're comped. If you don't change their leadership, their measurement, and their organizational functions, do you think you're going to get any change if you make a new process? I'm going to answer it for you because we're short out of time. No. So you may have to realign the way your organization does things in order to get the outcomes you need for cloud. And don't be afraid of that. Embrace it because that's leadership. And have you accounted for knowledge gaps, right? So if people don't know how to respond, then that's problematic, and you got to fix that. And if you make your first level respondents more than an escalator, then you're doing great. Break down the silos. Don't have it be, well, I can't share that with him. That's not his data. It's my data. It isn't either of your data. It's the company's. And do we have a way to conceptualize data flows to be able to show the environment? So here's an example of minimizing those known knowns. So this is an attack path. There's great information here. If we think about the way that our cloud environments are set up, there might be one guy, a data architect, who knows all the data flow. And if we only have that one person, then we may not understand the implications of something happening here all the way to something here. And that could mean that we don't respond with the urgency we need, we don't call out the right people, we don't take the right actions. And so we got to figure out ways to be able to visualize this because our cloud environment is so complex. You don't have an up-to-date Visio diagram for your on-prem stuff that's static. There's no freaking way you're going to be able to keep track of all this with your dynamic cloud environment. It's going to be really tough. So taking away number 5 is give your people a way to do more than muddle through an incident. And they got to have a better visual of all this. All right, So then I'm sorry for running out of time, but here's two last quick slides, right? So take advantage of your existing tools and data, right? If you've already got an IDP and you've got SaaS providers doing great stuff for you and you've got great threat intel and other ways to get IOCs, then use that and let that help you and inform you what's going on. Get vulnerability intelligence. If you've got something that can classify data, take advantage of that. If you've got other feeds that are telling you about your workload, awesome. If you've got threat detection, awesome. Don't throw the baby out the bathwater. Take all of these, look for things that are going to help you take all of these feeds and be able to get into action. And so when we think about getting into action, this gets us back to aligning on standards and processes. So these are examples of the NIST incident response framework, right? You just get these off of nist.gov and whatever it is, and you could have that, right? So again, takeaway number 6 here is align your processes and strategy to standards. So for incident response, if you have runbooks and you have an incident response process, then shape it like this so that you have a clear process for doing stuff. NASA had a checklist for everything. You should have a checklist for your common things, right? So that everybody, even the most junior, fresh off the boat person that just started with you knows how to respond to. And then another thing that I would tell you is look for things like the attack framework so that if you're using MITRE ATT&CK, someone would be able to maybe conceptualize, that's data exfiltration. I should probably escalate this. I need to call somebody. But if they don't know the things to look at because they're inexperienced, then you're not equipping them. So find standards that can help you. MITRE ATT&CK framework is fantastic because it becomes a tipper for your inexperienced teams to start to learn. That's data exfil. That's somebody doing privilege escalation. That's someone pivoting. That's somebody that's logging into an account with doing something that's never done before. It's anomalous behavior. But you're giving them a pretty simple list of things that if I see this, I do this. And that's really valuable. It doesn't become like a strike, I call it when I see it. It becomes I know these are things to look for. And successful organizations are going to be the ones that do that. So one last deal here's to take advantage of AI. And again, AI is a fantastic capability here beyond other buzzword bingo stuff. So we can look for rinse and repeat opportunities, right? But when we do that, we need to be cautious. Where's our data going? Who's touching it? Ensure that we're validating the results because we've all seen things that even with the best models still hallucinate, and that we want to find ways to refine our model as we go. Take advantage of AI because it can augment your team and give you capabilities that you don't have. And so on to our last slide here. If we're looking at victory, we can see this is the guys at Apollo 13 when they actually landed. For cloud security, the organizations that are going to be successful are the ones that are going to know their mission. They're going to work together to achieve it. And they're going to understand that with all that complexity, it's more than just tools. There are tools out there, that's fine. But if you only have tools, you're not going to win. You've got to figure out people, process, technology, and work it all the way across the board. It's very important. I apologize I ran short. I talked too much, talked too fast. I would love to take any questions that we have. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for answering questions. And good luck in your cloud journey. Any questions? Go for it.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. And so if there are questions, if you could raise your hand, I will run the microphone to you.
I'm going to beatbox if you don't ask questions. Maybe you
will
want me.
beatbox if you don't.
Maybe you want me to. Yeah. Yeah, I think that was that a gauntlet you just threw down there? And then sorry. Okay, no other questions. Hey, thanks a bunch for being here. Thanks for taking time.
Great.
Would be happy to talk to you in any way that I can help you. Good luck in your cloud journey.
Great. Thank you, Jason.